You're listening to Releasing Trauma, a survivor's podcast. And now here's your host, Tracy Osborne. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the show. Okay, today we're going to be talking about something a little bit different when it comes to trauma. And we're going to be talking about it more in a professional capacity and how it relates to leadership and how our leaders, managers, etc., can use trauma to learn how to change. And I know that sounds kind of confusing. So with me today is Tricia Steege, and she is going to explain to us how this works. So Tricia, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Tracy. Great to be here. Thanks for the opportunity.
Absolutely. This is going to be a fascinating topic because it's, like I said, it's not something that we normally discuss on the show. So, it's a little bit different. And everything. So, I think where I really want to start first is, now you practice something called change management. And, I want to start with explaining to our listeners, what does change management mean?
Okay. Yeah. So typically in an organization, when some major change is going to occur, such as rolling out a new technology, or there's some kind of a merger that has come about, or two companies coming together, or the company finds that in order to meet customer demand and whatever outside forces are coming in, they will implement typically a change initiative. Mm-hmm. And when we're talking about change management, we're talking about kind of what I'll call the architecture that we put in place to make sure that change is adopted. So all of the structures, methodologies, tools, communication, and those comprise of like communication plans. There's things that we do as change practitioners to make sure that adoption takes hold and that the company ultimately realizes the return of investment that it has in making these things happen. So there's formal definitions of change management, but a high level, it's really just the tools and processes we put in place in order to ensure or help make the adoption go better.
Okay. And, with big changes like that at work and in a corporation, that alone can present trauma to the
Yes.
employees, to the staff.
Yes. Yeah. So what has happened for me, I've been doing this work for probably about 30 some years. And, there's lots of money that's invested in these. And we know that about 70 research has told us, and it's kind of a not true over the years, is that about 70% of the change initiatives that are enacted in companies are not, they fail. And so that's why the discipline of change management is so important. But what happened for me, so we're doing this a while, about 10 years ago, even though my clients were having success with some successes, there was still a lot of that weren't working well. And I began to really realize, trying to unpack this a little bit, why is change management not happening? When we're putting all of the architecture in place, why do these initiatives still continue to not realize the investment of the dollars? And what I began to realize is, if we think about people adapting to a change, it really entails the individual having to make a personal decision to make that change. And that decision really happens at the vertex of the relationship of the direct leader to their direct report. And if that's a trusting relationship, people will run through walls for their manager and make a decision to change regardless of what the leader is asking them to do. But what we don't do well is, I think that the reason a lot of these change initiatives fail is because leaders simply do not know what their role is, During change, they don't recognize what's going on in people's brains when they're going through change, and they don't know some of the basic change methods and processes. But even more so, they don't realize how critical their role is and what they do to potentially sabotage building that trust. And some of that has to do with not understanding the kinds of things that change evokes, particularly for people who have been, raised in an environment such as what we talk about during trauma. And we know from like the adverse childhood experience research that 70% of folks have had at least one kind of traumatic issue in their life. Well, these are all walking into our organizations with us, not only in the employees, but the leaders. And so where my business is starting to focus is really helping leaders understand how the brain operates during change, how it processes, and what kinds of things inform how it succeeds and works during change. And trauma is one of those things. So I like the fact that at the beginning you talked about this is kind of a unique conversation, because it definitely is. I'm kind of out there in front of this in the change management world. There's not many people talking about this, but
no, there definitely isn't.
Which I'm excited about, because I like kind of always being the thought leader, if you will.
Yeah, you're a pioneer.
But I'm always kicking the rock, stumbling on the rocks, and then turn around and say, watch out for this rock or that rock. So, so I'm excited about it. And some of this is an outgrowth of my own personal story, how it was impacting, my trauma background was getting in the way of me being able to really have positive consulting client relationships and personal relationships. So it all kind of started marrying together and coming together for me.
I can see that. And I could see where, for a lot of people, especially trauma survivors, we don't like change.
Right.
And change is very, very discomforting and scary for so many people.
Yeah.
And you take that, in both an employee role and a leadership role, and that's just a recipe for a nightmare.
Right.
Because we're all going to be resistant to, whatever it is the corporation wants to do. And a lot of times, these companies, they just say, okay, this is what we're doing and this is what's going to happen.
Right.
And to hell with how you feel, as opposed to taking it from a more trauma-informed approach and saying, being a little bit more gentle about it. What are your concerns? What are your questions? And, really looking at it more from a humanities standpoint.
Right. Well, so I think there's a couple of things that are really working in our favor right now for those of us who work in the change world. One thing is, we know from after going through the pandemic that the word trauma now is a word that's creeping into the common nomenclature. The word trauma, I couldn't use that word with clients, prior to the pandemic.
Oh, sure.
Now we've all been through this trauma, but it's still a word that's a little skittish for business people. It's well understood in the healthcare world and social work and all. But in the business world, the word trauma still makes people a little bit, they equate it to racial trauma or, trauma that we've been through, like the pandemic and everything. So, but the fact that that's happened is kind of opening the door. Secondly, we have young people coming into the workforce now that are just not going to work in these toxic environments anymore. And so they're really almost demanding their leaders to be a little bit more human-oriented and people-centric oriented. Third thing I think is Brene Brown has done an amazing, she's created a whole opportunity to talk about vulnerability and all of these things that traditional business people have been afraid to talk about. So she's opened the door there. The fourth thing is that the whole study of neuroscience and everything is really emerging and taking off, and what we're beginning to learn about the brain and its plasticity and everything And so kind of circling back to your comment about people who've been through trauma don't like change. I would say it's not just people who've had trauma. It kind of gets triggered a little bit more. But people talk about, people not liking change and resisting change. The reality is it's not that people, it's our brains. It's the way our brain was created to protect us. And anytime we get any inkling of a threatening situation, the brain kicks into that survival mode. And so when I hear, some of my leader clients talking, they're just resisting, I try and really help them reframe it that it's not the people that are resisting, because nobody wakes up and says, I'm going to resist everything you tell me today. I mean, there's a few of those around. But basically, if we're not doing a good job when we're helping new change roll out, and as leaders, if we're not doing a good job to help understand what is it that you're feeling so threatened about, that's where we're missing the mark. And we can't expect like leaders in our organizations to be therapists. That's not what their role is. But when I'm working with them, I try and help them just understand what might potentially be going on in order to help them have a little bit more empathy and understanding, and understand why we're saying, being a little bit more sensitive to things, to your point, because we have so many trauma-oriented survivors in organizations too.
Absolutely. And you never know what a person has gone through, what a person is dealing with. You just, you don't always know. And usually you don't know at all. Because we're trained that, personal life stays outside those doors. Once you walk through those doors, it's all work.
Yeah.
And, it doesn't work that way. Our minds, our bodies, our brains, we just don't work that way. And
we're really bringing the holistic person to work. And for many years, we were told, work stuff at work, home stays home, never the twain shall meet.
Exactly.
But no wonder we all felt fractured, because you were asking me to forget parts of my humanness during work. So that's why I'm encouraged by what's happening today in organizations, that we're creating these, we want to create and are moving towards creating these environments that think about the holistic person.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, how can those who are in leadership roles, really make sure that they are coming from a more trauma-informed approach when dealing with, not just change, but just dealing with their teams on an everyday basis?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the work that we're specializing in my firm is what we're calling Neuroinformed change leadership development. So we specialize in building change leadership capabilities because change is happening so much. It's so much a part of it's so much an integral part of everything leaders do now. Not only just driving the operational side of the business, but they're managing change on a daily basis, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when we talk about neuroinformed, we're really teaching leaders about the brain, how it works, what it likes, what it doesn't like, why it reacts the way it does, how it processes change. And that is opening up a door for leaders to again, be a little bit more understanding and sympathetic. We teach them about different hacks that we could use, which are really a lot of the common things that we've traditionally used in change, making sure that people are clearly being communicated to, that there's a clear vision, a clear purpose, routine communications, understanding a little bit about how what the brain needs. So it needs certainty, and it needs, it doesn't like long periods of drawn out, what's the word I'm looking for? Uninformed information, which of course we've all been in for 2 years now, the uncertainty. Yep. So just helping leaders understand some of this is really what we've seen is their confidence level in how to lead change really gets catapulted after they understand some of these basics about the brain. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes complete sense. And I think, the more that our leaders can, grasp that and understand that, I think the more compassionate our workplaces are going to become, as opposed to the toxic environments that we've been dealing with. Yes. And I think too, the changes that we're seeing with COVID, and we're seeing a lot more people, working from home. And that has created a whole different environment for so many companies that are seeing productivity levels actually increase because their employees are able to work from home.
At the same time, they're seeing a lot of burnout. So while people have, have been more productive, if you will, they're also working much longer hours. This is a whole nother podcast discussion, Trace, on
I know
how to manage in the virtual world, because we do a lot of coaching and counseling around this too. But it's I don't remember where my thought line was going there.
No, glad I'm not the only one that happens to. That's usually me. I'm kind of like, I had a question, but I don't know what it was.
It's interesting, the whole virtual work world. Well, I guess I go back to what it's triggering for leaders. And not only is it, I have no clue how to do this, but also it's probably triggering a lot of insecurity for leaders. Like, I'm not able to really sit there and see what they're doing. Not like I visit their cube, but every moment of the day. But as long as they're outside, I have access to them. When I feel like I can't see them, I feel like I'm losing access. And then that probably triggers deeper insecurities about, well, what does this mean for me as a leader? Am I still as valuable as a leader? Because I don't feel like I can go out and manage the way I used to. And our goal here is to help bring leaders to kind of the precipice of getting in touch with might be going on with them. And then if they decide to, explore it deeper in a therapeutic sense, we can refer them to that. But we just really want leaders to become more aware. And I'll tell you a story if I have a moment to tell a story about how this has played out. I had a client, and I'll try to make this abbreviated. I had a client that I was working with who had a leader they were thinking about promoting in the organization. And the individual is really great at plugging holes in major issues. Like, he was the fix-it guy. But he was also known in the organization as being a real bully. And there was concern about promoting him into a more significant leadership role because of his patterns. Long story short, after a conversation that I had with him, it became really clear that there was some trauma in his background. And without going into too much detail, because it's a pretty significant story, I was able to talk with him about, after hearing some of his stories of his childhood, how it was translating into the way he was leading. And ultimately, he did not trust people, and he had very valid reasons why he didn't. And so that was coming out in his leadership, and it was ultimately impacting his long-term career because of the question mark that people were, reacting to him as a bully and scared of him. And so that's another. When I hear that story, that just again cements what we're trying to do in our firm is to help make the connections for leaders. Because when I shared with the individual, this is probably why you're getting this feedback, and this is why you're having trouble with leadership, is because you don't trust. And this is probably the reason, why, or a contributing factor. And I think it's probably the first time the dots had ever really been connected for him. And I don't know where he went with it, or if he went and got help or anything, but I remember him going very quiet when I pointed it out. And so we have lots of leaders that are exactly like that individual leading an organization. So that's why I feel like our work is really critical.
Absolutely. And, and I can definitely see where our traumas would affect our leadership skills and how we interact with other people. When you do have those trust issues, and it could be, I don't know the story, but, it could be that he was bullied as a child by his parents or, and so that relates, he knows that that's how you interact.
That's how right. That's exactly what it was. Yeah.
Yeah. And, so, how we're shaped and how our traumas have shaped us, especially when they stem from childhood, really translates to that. And I don't think, in a lot of situations, we don't really equate the two together.
No, don't make the connection.
Yeah.
And to the point you made a minute ago, leaders that we have in roles today were taught that stuff stays at home. Your personal life is not brought in. Luckily, I think, though, we have new and upcoming leaders, the younger people, and they're really approaching their world of work in a much more holistic way. And I think that they are probably going to be a little bit more open to thinking about this holistic way of leading. So, but we're all humans. We're all going to have our issues and our egos and everything else. So,
absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Tricia, this has been really cool. Thank you so much for coming on. It's been really fun to be able to look at trauma and stuff in a different manner. So thank you for that.
Yeah, you are most welcome. Thanks for having me. I'm excited about this work. I'm excited about the promise of it. And I appreciate the time to spend some time talking about it with you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And listeners, if you want to learn more about this, about how change management works and how it works with, with your business and that kind of thing, definitely reach out to Tricia. She is amazing. I will have all of her contact information in the show notes as always. Just go to releasingtraumapodcast.com and pull up Tricia's episode, and all her stuff will be there for you. So definitely, I advise you to reach out if this, sounds very interesting and you want to learn more. So definitely. Well, Tricia, again, thank you so much for coming on. This has been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks again, Tracy.
Absolutely. And listeners, thank you as always for tuning in. We'll talk to you in the next show. Thanks for tuning in. Be sure you hit subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss a show. Be sure to check us out on our new socials on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.